Looks like Alder Figueroa Cole is in the attendees list.
There's a Zoom update that needs to be run, just so you know.
Looks like everyone got caught in the same Zoom update.
I think it hit last Thursday, so that's telling who's got committees earlier in the week and who's got stuff later in the week.
Finance Committee meeting of Monday, March 6th, 2023, and ask staff to please call the roll.
Council President Berman.
Present.
Alder Carter.
Present.
Alder Verveer.
Here.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Here,
Alder Goodover.
Present.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. Our first item is general public comment. We have no one registered for general public comment. Are there any disclosures or recusals on today's agenda from members of the body? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there items that others would like to have excluded from the consent agenda? I'll just note that we do have folks available to answer questions on item 12. President Furman?
Item number 18, please.
Item 18. Alder Carter?
Yes, mine was going to be 12. You said there's someone here that can answer my question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Item 12. Alder Verveer?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question about agenda item number 17, please.
Item 17. Alder Figueroa Cole?
I'm looking for the number, but 76 to 13. Let me find them. 76 to 13. That's item 8.
Item 8.
Yeah.
All right, so we are currently excluding the following items from the consent agenda. Items 8, 12, 17, and 18. Are there any additional items that alders would like excluded from the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, President Furman, a motion?
Move consent agenda excluding items 8, 12, 17, and 18.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Are there questions? Is there discussion? Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda? Seeing no objection, we'll record unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda. And we'll move to item 8, which is Legistar 76213, a resolution approving the scope of services for the Cooperative Enterprise Development Program for 2023 and authorizing a contract with C4CS to implement the program. On item 8, President Furman, a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Alder Figueroa Cole, questions?
Is our question for finance?
Go ahead.
Last year in November, I think, or September, someone reached out to talk about funding for, I think it was for these cooperative groups, and I think they got removed from 2023 budget. Is this the same money that got rolled into from 2022 into this year for the co-ops?
I'm not sure of the answer to that right now. I'm sorry, I was not prepared for that.
It might be a better question for economic development, Alder, and
They're not here, right?
not seeing anyone. I don't know if Mr. Wachter knows the answer.
I don't know, but I can try to contact Matt Michalczewski and see if I can get an answer quickly.
Okay, that's fine. I can then check with you I mean, I tried to find it on the budget, but I'm pretty sure it's the same people. Like, I just couldn't.
Yeah,
Um,
although my understanding that this is a continuation of the program. So
Okay.
it's the same folks that we've been working with all along.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There are other questions about item 8? Seeing none, is there discussion? Seeing none, the motion is to adopt. Is there objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, that vote will be recorded. Item 8 is adopted. That will take us to item 12. Item 12 is Legistar 76401, approving the allocation of CDBG and ARPA funds to Sustain Dane for the energy efficiency and naturally occurring affordable housing project. We do have with us 3 folks available to answer questions: Claire Schaefer Olekshak from Sustain Dane, Abigail Corso, and John Viner from Elevate. Let's get a motion first. President Furman?
Move adoption.
Second,
Moved and seconded to adopt. Alder Carter, did you have questions for registrants? We also have Jessica Price here from staff.
Well, my question, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so my question is this for upgrading the housing that the CDA owns, or is this for upgrading affordable housing in general?
Oh, that's an easy question, Alder. It's not for CDA housing.
Okay,
It's for privately owned housing. But if either Jessica or Claire or Abby want to speak to the program in a little bit more depth, I would open it up for any of you to do that.
that would be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Alder Carter. I'm just going to give a little bit of context, and then if Claire at Sustain Dane or Abby want to add a little more detail. So this is a program that we're just wrapping up the first phase of, and so far it has provided energy efficiency upgrades to reduce energy costs and improve sort of the function of those buildings and the comfort for tenants in nearly 100 units of privately owned multifamily housing across the city, and that's housing that is affordable for folks that make less than our area median income. And so this is ensuring that the folks that need these benefits the most and often get left out of other energy efficiency programs are getting to benefit here. And so this is round 2 of that. So this is getting to do more of that good work. And so I'll pause there, and if you have any other follow-up questions, or I can let Abby and Claire join in.
So this is for folks that make under 60,000 or under 30,000.
I believe this is folks that are making under 60,000, but
Okay.
I don't want to misstate that.
That's fine. And then is this similar to different housing projects would apply for this money? Okay.
Yes.
Like a grant.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Claire or Abby, did either one of you want to add anything?
This is Claire. Nothing else that I need to add. I think Jessica did a great job summarizing the program, and here to answer other questions.
Any other questions?
I'm complete.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Evers?
Yeah, I'll just give Claire or Jessica the chance to be able to speak to how this is more about how this is the second phase. This is not a new program. This is something that's been going on for a while, correct? It's at least a year in the making. We've been providing these grants to increase the energy efficiency of natural occurring affordable housing. Again, the older housing stock of these, sometimes three and 4 units or 6 unit buildings that otherwise are like 30 to 40% less efficient than a new building. And so we're simply continuing an ongoing programming, correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions? Seeing none, thank you all. The motion is to adopt. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 12. And we'll take us to item 17, which is Legistar 76398, authorizing a contract with HNTB for continued passenger rail study services. President Furman, a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Questions, Alder Verveer?
Yes, thank you again, Mayor. A question or two for you, please, Tom Lynch. First, could you just give us a brief update as to where the passenger rail station study is currently and what the short-term schedule is? Obviously, we had great community interest at the kickoff meeting in early December, and I thought I recalled that the next round of public meetings would be in the first quarter of this year, but maybe I'm mistaken on that. So specifically, I was curious when the next public meetings are likely to occur, Tom, and then also if you could be specific as to what this resolution with HNTB provides for in terms of the additional services, because the resolution isn't specific. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first part. Yeah, it was our intent to have another public meeting in February. However, after that actually very well attended public meeting in the winter, the Federal Rail Administration released a notice of funding opportunity for the corridor identification program. And since that time, we've asked, the Wisconsin DOT to act as the lead agency and submit an application on behalf of us, City of Pewaukee, and Watertown. And so we've taken a small pause to allow kind of WISDOT to move forward with that more on the you might say it on the statewide level. Okay, and then we intend to re-engage. We are doing some behind the scenes design and location studies of the different various locations, but we intend to re-engage probably in May of this year. Things I might just also say are maybe a little bit slightly slower too, because Philip Gritzmarker was helping us out and was leading that effort, and he's since gone. So it's being handled by this office right here. As far as this, our initial contract with HNTB was $120,000, which was quite limited. It was really kind of a bare bones types of initiative. They've provided a couple of alternative locations, how much space it would fit. We might ask them to look at a couple of modifications to that. And so we would issue purchase orders, smaller purchase orders, to kind of do the analysis that we need to have done. We'll be preserving a small amount, actually not a small amount, but we'll be preserving an amount. We won't be using the full $350,000 initially in case the Wisconsin DOT might need some of this funding as they move forward with the corridor identification program. So did that answer your questions, or could I clarify any other items if you would like?
No, that was very helpful, Tom. Thank you for the update, and especially so I can share that the community should look forward to another round of public engagement, likely in May.
Yeah. Yep.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions? Alder Carter?
Tom, on the same fund thought, you talked about there might be, or there will be community meetings this summer. Can we ensure that there will be adequate space, because this is a hot topic for a lot of people, and they want to be able to engage. Folks are still excited about having this in town, so I just want to make sure that your office provides adequate space for everyone.
Yeah, we held it at the largest room in MMB, but maybe we'll look for a larger room after that. And then we'll make some provisions. We also not only had problems with our physical meeting, but we had problems with our virtual meeting because I think 700 registrants wanted to attend. And so Zoom kind of, we weren't prepared for that type of participation in Zoom. And so now we know. And so
I think this
will be prepared.
Yeah, this type of excitement I haven't seen this type of excitement in a long time. And even though we're months away from the last meeting, people are still talking about it and still excited about it. Thank you.
Yep, your point is well taken, Alder. Other questions? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of item 17? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 17 and move on to item 18, which is Legistar 75053, a substitute establishing a grant program to support accessible taxi cabs in Madison. President Furman, a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Questions, President Furman?
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this. I'm trying to better understand this budget amendment. I'm hoping, whether it's the alder that's sponsoring or staff can help. I think my two first starting questions have to do with why are we trying to solve the problem this way and not require taxi cab companies to have accessible vehicles like the ordinance that was passed in the past. I'm struggling with the lack of requirements involved in this program, so I'm trying to better understand what some other options might be. I don't know if that's a good question. I believe Alder Paulson was expecting me to ask this question, but I don't know if there's a member of transportation staff that could talk about that as well.
So I think we'll probably take the all of the above approach here. If there is an objection, we'll let the main sponsor speak to it, but would also just put on notice the attorneys and the transportation staff if they want to weigh in as well. But Alder Paulson?
Yeah, and I'm happy to let staff take a first crack at it, but I'm happy to try to address President Furman's question.
Why don't you go ahead?
Sure. And so I hope you all had a chance to read my very long email from the other day, which did try to touch on some of that. Specifically to Alder Furman or President Furman's question about why not the surcharge? Why are we tackling it this way? Just a bit of history. In 2004, Madison passed an ordinance that would have required all taxi cabs to offer accessible service, and at the time also authorized a surcharge to support that accessible service. But at the time, it was a little controversial. The taxi cab companies at the time weren't all a fan of it. And what wound up happening was Union Cab came forward and said, we commit to providing accessible service 24/7. And so the ordinance was written to say that the ordinance would be on the books, but it would be suspended unless the transportation engineer, the traffic engineer, issued a finding of need, as in there was no one providing the service, so there was now a need for it, in which case the ordinance would require it of everyone. But that also included if there hasn't been for at least 5 years, this finding of need, that the ordinance would permanently sunset and Union Cab continue to provide that service for 5 years. So the ordinance that was passed in 2004 sunsetted. And so the opportunity for taxi cabs, the requirement for taxi cabs to be required to have accessible rides sunsetted, and the opportunity for them to charge an additional surcharge also left with that. In 2015, the Disability Rights Commission reviewed some of their strategic priorities, and one of the priorities they identified was we would like to increase the number of accessible cabs in Madison. They created a working group and they issued a report back to the council. I unfortunately didn't link to that, but it's in Legistar, and I can share the number if people are interested. The council accepted that report. And part of the recommendations at that time were to reinstate the ordinance, require all taxi cabs in Madison to provide accessible service, and allow them to charge a surcharge to cover that cost. The council did not move forward with this. Someone who might have been here could maybe talk more to the reasoning behind that. In 2015, there was a quote from former Alder Clear, in which kind of summed it up as the thought was that taxi cab companies are already having enough challenging times to just stay in business. This was right around the time that the state was about to preempt, in fact, did preempt cities from putting any regulations on things like Uber or Lyft, and they were having a tough time with that. And so the Mark Clear quote, which was in the Isthmus article that was in the email, at the time Mark said something to the effect of, we didn't think it was a good time to add this additional burden to taxi cab companies who were already struggling to compete on price, to have this additional charge on it. So the council and Disability Rights Commission did not move forward with actually reviving that ordinance and adding this requirement that all taxi cab companies provide accessible service and had a surcharge to do that. And I think when we were discussing this, amongst ourselves and in some of the committees, there was still a feeling that maybe this was going to be a little bit too much to put an additional charge on folks on taxi cabs to raise their prices. And so that's why we didn't do that. And that's why we took a different approach of saying, well, let's just go ahead and subsidize the capital cost is one of the main barriers to getting the accessible cabs on the road, rather than funding it through a surcharge on riders.
Thank you, Alder. Tom and or Attorney Haas, do either of you want to add anything on that question?
No, I appreciate that Alder Paulson went first.
I don't really have anything to add either.
President Furman, you had another question?
Yeah, I do. I probably have a few more questions. Thank you. I see there was a recommendation for there not to be any cost added to a ride. Actually, let me start with there will be no requirement for these particular cabs to be used for accessible service. We're hoping to encourage that, if I understand correctly, by providing them. But if the taxi cab companies decide not to prioritize or accessible rides with these cabs, how does that all work? I mean, what are the strings attached with this grant?
Alder Paulson, why don't you start again?
Sure. So yes, it's not required that these cabs are used for accessible rides. Though maybe I would pitch that as it's certainly not required that they are only required to be used for accessible rides. I think that certainly part of the design was that by putting these on the road, when they're not being used for accessible service, then certainly there's no reason they can't be used for people who don't need those accessible features. And so we want the assets to be out running as much as possible, and just keeping the coordination costs down. We don't want them sitting around waiting for an accessible ride. It's just a logistical challenge for the taxi companies. There is language in the resolution to say that as part of the metrics that we're interested in collecting, that we do want to know information about how many accessible rides are being asked for, and as part of that was envisioned that we would try to capture how often are you getting calls for these cabs that and you can't provide that service, and certainly it's intended that if you're not using these cabs for accessible service, we're putting a lien back on it, and we would include some provisions to claw it back should they simply never do it, and should this not make a difference, that we would have that ability to potentially claw them back. That language is not in the resolution. Getting that was a little bit more detailed than we wanted to put in the resolution. That was more detailed than we wanted staff to have to try to come up with all the right legal language until we pass this. So there's certainly in the intention to find a way to be able to ensure that these are being used effectively, with the tension between how much micromanagement do we have, how challenging is it, because we're not going to know when someone's getting a call for a cab in, so we don't necessarily want to leave the cab idle in case there's a call for an accessible cab. But certainly the intention is that the point of these cabs is to make it so that you can have more accessible services, and we expect that that the cab companies will use it that way, and we'll be looking for ways to make sure that that comes to pass. And I should just mention that the final language on the program and the grant program and the requirements will go before the Transportation Commission, so there'll be an opportunity to review that to make sure that we've done as best we can to make this program effective while also not being so absurdly difficult to comply with that it winds up not being effective.
Thank you. I'm going to have some questions for staff, but I think maybe this is the last question. Maybe Alder Paulson, maybe you can help me with is there was a change to the ordinance that says riders should be charged the same fare, accessible features should be charged the same fare, and that the taxi meter won't start before passengers are boarded and secured. Do we have any understanding on who actually will, if anybody, will be reimbursing those taxi cab drivers for that time? And will that de-incentivize taxi cab drivers from picking up possibly accessible rides, knowing that they may have to spend an extra 5-10 minutes boarding and unboarding, but they're not going to get compensated for that, and therefore they won't have other rides, and so they may maybe even frankly avoid these types of fares because they're not getting paid for their time.
Yeah, and I think you identified a problem. I will say that this particular language came at the desire of the Disability Rights Commission to see that this language be included, because they feel very strongly, and I think that I guess I can't say that all of us agree with it, but I think certainly I do, that that people shouldn't be charged extra just because of the way they were born to use services, as we're creating this equal opportunity to this service. We wanted to make sure that no one was being charged extra to use these features. That was a very strong principled stand that they wanted to take. And they specifically cited that this is a concern of a place that things are abused, and that it's a way that people who do need this accessible service are often discriminated against and charged extra for by having these sort of extra surcharges and extra add-on fees to be able to use this. And they specifically identified not starting the meter until the taxi starts moving as one of the things that they thought that the Disability Rights Commission thought was important to include. I think you're right that it is a question of how is time for that compensated, and I don't have a good answer for that. My best understanding is that Union Cab already doesn't do that this is a standard practice for Union Cab, that they don't start the meter until things start moving. I can't prove that. I don't have that written down in front of me, but I seem to remember them saying that. And so I think the evidence that this won't be a problem is that we already have seen this that's how this works in practice, but that the Disability Rights Commission felt very strongly that it be put into writing.
Thank you. I've got some questions for possibly either Tom or Attorney Haas. Does the state require us to add surcharges to rideshare services? So if we wanted to re-implement a surcharge that applied to all trips to help subsidize the time lost as well as money for cabs, accessible cabs, et cetera, would we be able to apply that to rideshares?
Alder, I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that question. I wasn't involved with this resolution. I'm not even sure if our office was. I guess Alder Paulson would be able to answer that.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, without warning you of this question, so I apologize. It also has to do with state law, so I'm not sure you know the answer without researching it.
And
but I figured to ask.
If we were involved, I assume it would have been Attorney Piguero, and I could ask her to get some information by tomorrow.
Tom, do you happen to know what the state law allows or doesn't allow?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, that's fair. I apologize for just dropping that on you. And then the other question that I think maybe you can help with, Tom, are there other ways or other funding sources that these taxi cab companies could access to have grants towards accessible vehicles?
I apologize. I'm in two meetings right now.
I need to be at that other meeting shortly too. I understand. I'm sorry.
Most of them, some of the grants have to do with nonprofits, and so there is one mechanism that could provide this, but it's a little bit cumbersome. It would actually have to go towards a nonprofit. And so Union Cab, actually, I think at one point had set up a nonprofit to be able to accept some federal funding in this avenue, but it hasn't been used. Alder Paulson has his hand up because I think he's familiar with that also, or I suspect you've been talking with Union Cab on that. So.
Yeah, I actually wanted to just answer to Attorney Haas. Attorney McReynolds has been somewhat involved in the drafting of this ordinance. So the city attorney's office has seen this, but she may be able to answer that question earlier. To the other grant programs, yes, there is a federal grant program, the 5310 federal grant program, which we're going to maybe use as the basis for starting that. The MPO does a lot of that work, and Ben Lyman there, and Ben has been involved in the drafting of this ordinance quite a bit and giving helpful feedback. My understanding is that Union Cab has applied for 5310 grants. I don't know if I think they may have gotten it, but I want to be really careful on how I answer that. But they certainly don't have anything on the road today from it.
Thank you, everybody. Mayor, that's all my questions for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, questions?
Yeah, I do. If I recall, when this came up before, we were talking about the expense of having this type of cab. So when the company, whether it's Union or someone else, applies for this money, do we know approximately how much an accessible cab costs? I can't remember what was said before when we were in budget. Alder Paulson,
you mean the cost of a ride, Alder?
I think the cost of the actual cab, because if I remember correctly, it was pretty expensive, and that's one of the things that the cab company was saying, and then maintaining it was expensive too, I guess.
Alder Paulson?
Yes, thank you. The estimated cost is kind of in the $60,000 to $70,000 range. I apologize. I could have. I don't remember off the top of my head what the state has a contract to buy these things, but it is pricey. It's well north of $50,000 because you've got to buy a minivan, and then you got to buy the wheelchair lift, and you've got to install that, and it's involved piece of mechanical work to make this all happen. So a lot of the taxi cabs use Prius, much smaller, and they buy them used, and so their typical vehicles are more in the kind of the $15,000 to $20,000 range. This is adding. This is significantly more than that for the larger structure than the big upgrades. So
when if this passes, they'll be applying for this money to purchase a vehicle. Am I correct on that? Or will we be buying? They will be buying the vehicle.
Yes, the program as designed right now has them buying the vehicle. The city maintains a lien, so if they go out of business, or if if they don't meet whatever requirements we put in it, we can claw it back. But we did briefly explore what happened if the city owned it, and we leased it back to him. The fleet supervisor, he never says, he's convinced. He's very capable and very confident, and I agree with him that he could do it. But there are some tricky ownership and legal and insurance questions, and so to keep it simple, we did not pursue that. But unfortunately, it would make them buy gas vehicles. There aren't yet electric minivans that could do this. But
so I guess my last question, by the way, is what's the cost of oversight for this program if we have to ensure that they are not overcharging, that they are using it correctly? Have we looked into that or no? And who would oversee the program?
Mayor, I'm happy to take a first shot at it, however you want to.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, we already have a taxi coordinator on city staff. Keith Pollack coordinates our taxi licenses, and so this program is only for licensed taxis. So we are already having contact with them, and we already collect data and information from them. So we will be, as part of the next step, should this get authorized, to come up with the exact metrics that we want them to calculate. We didn't want to put all of those into the resolution, but we'll be doing that. And so the intention is that will go through Keith in his. I think he actually works for Metro. Not 100% sure where he sits in the org chart, but there is a little bit
traffic engineering.
Okay, there is a little bit of. This is, as the mayor loves to tell me, you can't keep dropping things on staff, and there is a little bit of unknown on this, and so we are trying to think about ways to make this so that it is not overly burdensome on staff. So when we're designing these metrics, we want to keep in mind that the cab companies are pretty lean businesses, and so we don't want them to have to fill out a 70,000-page report every quarter, and we don't want to have a staff person who has to sit there and read 70,000 pages of submitted data and then go out and audit 70,000 pages of shared data. So we are going to try to figure out with staff what's the right balance here to for oversight, workload, and the ability to collect and manage these metrics.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Alder. And Alder Evers, questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is for Alder Paulson. Thank you for your commitment to working on this. But I've been reading the white paper that you provided, and I appreciate it. But I'm still confused. It looks like the white paper was about exploring best practices in this field that other municipalities are engaged in. And I'm curious why you chose an incentive only, kind of like it's all carrot, there are no sticks. And this goes back to the line of questioning that President Furman had. All these other jurisdictions had some form of a requirement in place I guess they felt like they couldn't just solve the problem by providing the carrots or the incentives. Why is it that you think that this is the best way to go?
Mayor, I assume I can. So
We're slightly less formal in finance committee meetings.
well, I always want to. I always want to
appreciate
follow
that.
the rules. So I've got the death glare before. So so I think some differences. So Chicago is an interesting example where it is a little bit of there is a little bit of stick as part of its incentive, right? Because they charge you extra if you don't provide the service,
Exactly.
and then they turn that into an incentive. And then New York, I don't actually know if there are sticks as part of the New York program. If there was some great penalty, but there is a surcharge added. I guess it ultimately comes back to we're just a smaller market that's facing a tougher battle. When 2 years ago there were 4 cab companies in town, and now there are 2. Badger got bought by Green Cab, and then Green Cab stopped being a cab company, stopped operating under the Madison license, and so they stopped reporting, and they stopped the protections that we give folks, and they stopped giving 24/7 service because I decided it was easier and more profitable to use the lesser state regulation and bypass all of that. And then, in fact, even with that, they didn't make it, and they went out of business. And they took Van Gogh out with them, which was a provider of accessible rides and has put further strain on other accessible transit. So I think the ultimate answer here is that I think that the accessible fare might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. If we put that on there, put that on the 2 remaining cab companies to require them to provide it, because Madison Taxi doesn't currently provide accessible service at all, and then Union Cab is down to just a couple, and all of them are struggling. Madison's unemployment is so low, our housing costs are so high. It's the same story everywhere. It's incredibly difficult to recruit drivers and to hire people, just like all the other fields where it's a challenge to hire workers. And so I think why only carrot? Because I'm afraid if I use the lightest stick possible, I might knock the whole thing over.
Is that right? I mean, the surcharges in these cities were something like only 10 cents a ride. How is that going to change the economics of the cab use?
Well, we have we are not New York, and we're not Chicago for being able to support these markets. And could you make it on only 10 cents? And could we do it? Maybe. I don't want to say that it wouldn't. I mean, I haven't done the math to figure out how many rides are there and how much would that earn, and how many cabs could we do this, and could we do it in conjunction to help support the loading and unloading time? And maybe we could still do that as something else. But at the end of the day, we need to get more accessible cabs on the road. That was a recommendation in the 2015 report. Like recommendation number 3. There needs to be more accessible cabs on the road, and they have. And that was the Cap Times did a cover story here not long ago, and identifying one of the key issues. There just aren't enough cabs on the road to be out there to pick folks up. So I thought the straightest way forward is to get some really nice looking carrots and get people to pick them up, and not make it too complicated, not burden the cab companies that are already challenged, not burden staff who are already challenged, to find the bandwidth, and let's just get the cabs on the road.
Do you think at a future time then we should look at putting some requirements in place once, if companies do, use these grants to purchase them, that we should evolve towards some kind of a continuing program. I'm concerned that people will take money but not follow up with the program again if it's not required. Businesses will, try to crawfish their way out of the obligation, unless there's very strong incentives or some kind of requirement that they have to. Could you see a second phase of this where we would adopt something akin to the original ordinance requiring the TNCs to actually see this as part of their obligation if they're going to get a license from the city?
Yeah, though I would just caution you on the term TNC means a very specific thing, and that's
all
not.
Right. Well, I'm sorry then.
Yeah.
Taxi cabs. Okay.
Right. So the two taxi cabs, the licensed taxi cab companies in Madison. I think that yes, there certainly could be a consideration to say that we should go back and bring back the 2004 ordinance, or follow up on the recommendations from the DRC in 2015 and require this. And it's a heck of a lot easier to push for the licensed companies to accept a new requirement if we've helped them meet that requirement. Both of this grant is intentionally only open to the licensed companies. So they already are agreeing to follow our rules. And I think certainly we could, have a discussion as a community. Should we change those rules, push a little more burden onto all riders, people who use the service to help fund the service? Totally open to that. And to get back to one of President Furman's earlier points about, is there a way to compensate the taxi companies and the taxi drivers who are spending this additional time to do that? You're pushing that cost onto all riders to ensure that there's a accessible option for all, I think might make a lot of sense. But for now, the program in front of us, I wanted to start by getting more cabs on the road, and we will be careful to make sure that we design the grant program so that we can reclaim the cabs should they not be used in a way that we think is consistent with the spirit of the program. And we can continue to revise the ordinances around taxi cabs as we go. We probably should, because there's a whole huge bunch of text in the ordinance, none of which applies anymore. And you have to really know how that works. And that could be part of a cleanup, and part of the cleanup might be, well, let's actually put some teeth behind this again.
Well, thank you. One last question then. And excuse me for not reading every line of the proposal, but is this just a one-year grant funding opportunity, or is there a deadline by which they have to apply? And I'm not too thrilled with the idea that this would become an annual budget item.
Yeah, I only intended this to be a one-off amendment into the capital budget. It was not envisioned as next year we're going to fund another $250,000, and the year after that we'd spend another $250,000. So future councils are welcome to do so, but it was envisioned as a one and done. Let's fund these, and the program would open, award its money, and then that would be it. It wouldn't make future awards, unless the program is so wonderfully successful that the council says, gosh, this was a great idea, let's do it again.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other alders in the queue with questions, and we've sort of slid into discussion anyway. There is a motion and second to approve. Is there discussion? President Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly read the Cap Times article and appreciate the efforts involved in this, but I as Alder Evers said, well, there is no stick here. I feel like we're giving cars to the companies and sort of crossing our fingers and hoping that they'll do the right thing. I think the state of our cab market in Madison is incredibly difficult, and don't see any signs of it getting better. I think if we give these cars, I'm not convinced we're going to see a difference in accessible service and really get the value for the money. And so I would like future councils at this point to explore implementing a small surcharge to fund stuff like this. I think it's obviously many other cities do that. I think it's incredibly justified. I'd love to see us, even if we have to work with the state to be able to do that, figure out if we could do a surcharge for the rides, the ride share services. But I just think doing a grant and kind of crossing our fingers is not the right way to do it. Taking back the cars, I'm not sure what we're going to do with the cars if we take them back. I guess we could put them in our fleet or something, but they're certainly not going to be used for accessible cab service. So there's just too much of a crossing our fingers with this. So unfortunately, I can't support this. Thanks.
Alder Vitever.
So I guess I have an opposite perspective, particularly as someone who's been sitting on the Healthy Retail Access Program for quite a while, which I view as very similar in that the city has an interest in maintaining the health and vitality of our residents. And so we put our money where our mouth is and we say, hey, we want to have food access in areas with limited food access. And so we give grants to businesses to be able to do that. And I see this as very similar. I also really want to applaud Alder Paulson and Miadzi for doing this work. They brought forward sort of a very limited plan previously. And we said, this is great. Please go back to the drawing board. And they did. And I think Alder Paulson has given an exceptional vision of why this is the appropriate thing to do at this time. And I am fully supportive of it.
Thank you, Alder. Is there further discussion? Alder Evers.
Thank you, Mayor. I find myself somewhere in the middle, and that I don't know if the economic incentives are going to be sufficient as to really drive change and behavior on the part of these companies. But I am willing to give it a shot, and so I'll be voting for this. But I also do think that staff and interested alders really need to work on something that is more comprehensive and likely to be more effective, in some kind of surcharge where there's 10 cents a ride, 30 cents a ride, 25, figuring out what that is, how many total rides are, how much money do we need to raise to be able to provide some kind of support for this. To me, that's the way to go about it. That's will likely be more effective in the long run. We can provide these vehicles to get started, but there'll be operating costs that will need to be subsidized in the future. Hence the need for that surcharge, and the vehicles will wear out over time. We don't want to have to provide these grants in years down the road. I think something that's more consistent with what other municipalities are doing would be in order, but I'll vote for this. And again, I appreciate the work that Alder Paulson has done on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that I would like to see a little bit more, incentives to comply with it. I would hope that if it passes tonight, that we continue to work on it and really get some cost numbers back to the council so we can really have a clear picture on how much this is going to cost us, as clear as we can get. And I know how blurry that sentence sounds, so I'll accept that. But I do think we need more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. We have no other alders in the queue wishing to speak. Given your collective comments, I'll anticipate a roll call. Is there any further discussion? If not, the motion is to adopt. All in favor, aye. Those opposed, no. As your name is called, and Christine will please call the roll.
Matt Vernon?
No.
Alder Carter?
Come back to me, please.
Alder Verveer,
Aye.
Alder Figueroa Cole,
Aye.
Alder Whitaker,
Aye.
Alder Evers,
Aye.
Alder Carter.
Aye.
It's 5 ayes.
With 5 ayes and 1 no, the motion passes. And that is the end of our agenda.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn.
Half hour late for another meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Assuming no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.